Welcome to another episode of Navima's podcast. So today we are going to continue our previous session where previously on the Friday we had actually gone and read an excerpt from the book by Mr. Jagdish Mandal, who is the son of Jagannath Mandal. So there we actually got to know and read the ground reports which were suppressed by the government machinery in that fateful day in 31st January 1979. So we requested Dr. Bijeet Prashantha, the author of this book, which you can see here, History of Hindu Mafia and Hindu Genocide. So he is going to now delve into the historical perspective of the atrocities which were committed across the subcontinent, including in especially in actually eastern part of region, West Bengal and Bangladesh. So, Namaste Bijitda, Jai Shri Ram, Vande Mataram.
Namaste, Jai Sri Ram.
Yes. So, as I have told in the intro that you are going to help us to actually bind together what happened in Marichjhapi was an isolated event, or it was a pattern which was already established before that fateful day on 31st January 1979.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the simple answer is no, it is not a simple, isolated, single event. In fact, Marxism and communism in the land of India has sort of helped and actually led in a number of massacres and genocides. And The Morijjabi massacre is simply one of them. And In this talk, we are going to discuss what are the other massacres other than the Morijjabi massacres that these communist parties and the communist sort of people and the system overall has perpetrated in our land, right? So, in this talk, we are going to start with some basics of Marxism, right? And I am directly going to quote from the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. Basically, in the coming 10 minutes, you are going to get a first hand sort of account of how Karl Marx basically thought of communism and how it is going to play out in the world and in the global politics. And then in the next probably 10-20 minutes, we are going to discuss the ventures of Communist Party of India and their unholy alliances with Muslim League, for example. Um, and then we are going to discuss all the massacres that the communists have perpetrated post 1947. So, yeah, so let's start with what is actually Marxism, right? So I think in 1848, Karl Marx proposed a hypothesis that the history of all societies has been the history of class struggles. And then, in these circumstances, the modern bourgeois society, the so called the rich urban society, especially by the drastic improvement of the scale of production, for example, they have created a new definition of class altogether. And then Karl Marx sort of hypothesized that in such a scenario, a new form of struggle actually is taking place and is playing out in the context of let's say nations and civilizations. And Gradually that sort of class struggle is replacing the old feudal structure of oppression. And as per Karl Marx, this feudal structure was prevalent. I mean, so obviously Europe had a feudal structure, but he sort of argued that this feudal structure is sort of omnipresent even in countries like India or a continent like Africa, to name a few. Okay, so let's expand this idea a little bit. So here Marx is basically saying that because of the drastic improvement in the scale of production, for example, and then the ever-growing demand of manufactured product, after the Industrial Revolution. All nations have been compelled to sort of adopt the mode of mass production that only the bourgeoisie, like the rich elite urban class, they can approve of, right? And then there is this huge creation of enormous amount of wealth, and then there is a sudden increase of urban population that is happening around 1850s. So because of the all these sort of events and phenomena that are going on, the bourgeoisie, they have ensured, in Karl Marx's words, that much of the wealth of the nations get concentrated in very few hands. Okay, and this has eventually led to a centralization of politics. And overall, other than colossal productive force, these bourgeoisie, they are also sort of started to impact the world politics, and they are trying to create a world in quote unquote in their own image. Okay. Now, in contrast to bourgeoisie, you have the proletariats, right? And due to extensive use of machinery post industrial revolution, the simple and monotonous nature of the work was being sort of these kind of work started to become popular and started to sort of replace art and other sort of creative activities, and which actually led to a loss of uniqueness of an individual. Okay, and it led to a loss of individuality, so to say. And then because the price of commodities and the price of labor, both of these are adding up to the cost of production, cheapest cost of production in modern industries, they are bringing down the price of labor as well, right? Because the capitalists, they want to sell their commodities in the cheapest possible way, and one way to achieve this is to bring down the price of the labor. So that's why Marx is arguing ki this cheaper cost of production and the attempt for it actually leading to a very worsening situation of the laborers, and it reduces the aspiration of the proletariat to the means of subsistence that he requires for his maintenance and for the propagation of his race. Okay, so it is reducing the aspiration of the proletariat class, and this huge mass of proletarian labors has contributed to a huge aggregation of products and profit that only serve the interests and the ambitions of the bourgeoisie and left the proletariat ever deprived. So this is making sense, right? I mean, he's saying that there is a large labor class who are working at a very cheap sort of labor cost, and that is helping the bourgeoisie to gather a huge amount of wealth. And through this gathering of wealth, they have started to finally impact the global politics as well. I mean, this is a phenomena which is even happening right now, right? Um, and then now the sort of controversial part begins, where Marx started to propose that in such a circumstances, it behooves the proletariat class to sort of start forming an ever expanding union, regardless of nation, society, belief, food. So Marx here started to imagine that there will be a sort of a global, ever expanding union of this proletariat class, and then they will gradually create a political party. It's like a global political party, and then the identity of labor that has stripped off a proletarian every kind of national, religious, and moral character, that itself is going to help in the globalization of that party, so called the Marxist or the Communist Party. And then these proletarians will eventually rise over their petty identities to unite, revolt, and dethrone the bourgeoisie from power all over the world, right? And
Uh,
also the condition of
Bijit, just
Mhm.
one interjection. So when you mentioned that the Karl Marx was trying to actually organize the proletariat, the labor class, who were being exploited by the capitalists, we have to remember uh, that Karl Marx was actually helped by, let me just get the name, Frederick Engels. he was
Right, right,
himself like a bourgeoisie.
right.
Engels actually helped Karl Marx without the money, which monetary help, which was provided by Friedrich Engels.
Mm-hmm.
Karl Marx could not have done what he was able to achieve. So there are two sides of
Right,
the
right.
argument, so that people might be thinking,
No, no.
okay,
So
hmm,
I mean, I'm just stating stating
hmm,
straight from the book. I mean,
hmm,
this is what Karl Marx is saying, and so far, so far it seems like a very nice, naive, and very ideal sort of thing. But I'm
hmm,
going to
hmm,
pose my criticism of this whole theory in a couple of minutes. I'm just
yeah,
saying ki what Marx actually laid out. Right. So Marx therefore concluded that obviously the bourgeoisie, they have become their own sort of grave digger by calling on the potential of the proletarians to become united to grab power from the bourgeoisie. Right. So Karl Marx is saying कि ऐसे भी तो इंडस्ट्री बढ़ रहा है एंड बिकॉज ऑफ द ग्रोइंग इंडस्ट्रीज एनीवे द लेबर क्लास आर स्टेइंग टुगेदर तो इसलिए उनके बीच थोड़ा इंटरेक्शन भी बढ़ रहा है सो फॉर एग्जांपल फॉर ए गिवन सॉर्ट ऑफ अगर कोई कारखाना बन रहा है कहीं वहाँ पे जितने भी लेबर है दे कैन इंटरेक्ट एंड टॉक टू ईच अदर about their sort of about whatever atrocities or sort of suppression of their thoughts and their aspirations and that is happening and then they can sort of unite. So, in a way, the bourgeoisie, by accumulating these many people in a single place, actually they are digging their own grave. So that was the opinion of Karl Marx. And then, along with the rise of this proletariat class, Karl Marx further envisioned abolition of several traditional ideas. So Marx is saying that due to this weird nature of urbanization and capitalization, obviously there is a undercurrent of dissatisfaction among the proletariat class and due to which the proletariat class will rise after abandoning various identities like national, religious, and moral identities. And because of this sort of dream, right, that Karl Marx initially envisioned, and because Karl Marx is saying because this is going to happen, it will lead to abolition of a few sort of traditional, at least a few traditional ideas. For example, abolition of private property because the wage labor creates capital but this very capital creates antagonism between classes. So capital creates not only personal but also societal power. To strip the bourgeoisie of the social power and status that they enjoy, the idea of private property itself needs to be abolished by the communist party. राइट कि जब तक प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी रहेगा तब तक हायरार्की रहेगा अगर हायरार्की रहेगा तो ऐसे बुर्जुआजी क्रिएट होता रहेगा सो देन इट इज द रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी विल बी द रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी ऑफ द कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी टू स्ट्रिप देम ऑफ द प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी एंड नॉट ओनली देयर प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी सबका प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी एबोलिश कर दिया जाएगा then the next point was abolition of individuality, right? Because here Karl Marx is basically assuming that in the limit of the antagonism between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat class, all attributes of an individual vanish except the communist class identity. So here Marx is taking the logic to the extreme कि वो बोल रहा है कि जब मतलब मास प्रोडक्शन ऑफ कैपिटलिज्म जब चरम जगह पहुंचेगा तब और कोई आइडेंटिटी बचेगा नहीं एक्सेप्ट फॉर द आइडेंटिटी दैट ही इज sort of constructing the bourgeoisie and proletariat because there will be no other identity and when the labor can no longer be converted into capital societal power cannot be monopolized. Okay, so Marx here is arguing that in the limit of vanishing individual property the individual identity of bourgeoisie also will vanish and the proletariats never had any individual identity anyway, right, because they were living in anyway very poor downgrade trodden conditions so they lost all their identity when they came from village into a city and were working as a labor in an industry. It was pretty much an open jail. So because the proletariats did not have any identity, and the vanishing individual property will strip off the bourgeoisie of their identity, and so in this process, the communist will result in a Communism will result in a complete disappearance of individuality and individual identity. Then Marx is saying ki this Communist Party will also abolish the family as well. Abolition of family is one of the characteristics that Karl Marx also sort of imagined. Why? Because the family to Karl Marx is a luxury only of the bourgeoisie in an urban industrial society. Family is formed out of capital and out of private gain. Hence, the abolition of private property will invariably abolish the idea of a family. Right? कि मजदूरों का तो फैमिली रखने का कोई हक ही नहीं है. Right? तो because of that, the Communist Party will work in such a way कि मजदूरों का तो फैमिली है नहीं, लेकिन जो बुर्जुआजी है उनका भी फैमिली स्ट्रक्चर खत्म कर दिया जाएगा. Next, Karl Marx is imagining abolition of eternal truths. So Marx, so for example, obviously big narratives like religion, right? So abolition of eternal truths, where Marx is denying the existence of any truth beyond the truth of class struggle, right? Here Marx is not being able to see or identify anything other than class identity. Okay, so that's why he's saying that there is no truth in this world except for this class struggle. So hence he claims that the ideas and the truths of each age have been twisted to suit the narrative of the ruling class. For example, religious, moral, philosophical, judicial ideas, they have been constantly reshaped to sort of survive the hammer of time. कि रूलिंग क्लास हमेशा अपना जो दबदबा है वो बचा के रखना चाहता है और इसीलिए रूलिंग क्लास ने रिलीजियन क्रिएट किया है, मोरालिटी क्रिएट किया है, फिलोसफी क्रिएट किया है, जुडिशियरी क्रिएट किया है. सो नाउ मार्क्स इज सेइंग कि ये सब अगर इसको इटर्नल ट्रूथ अगर मानते हो तो ये सब एबोलिश हो जाएगा एंड देयर मे बी अ फ्यू इटर्नल ट्रूथ्स that have been common across all states and all time, but they must be abolished along with all religions and all morality, so that only the truth of class antagonism remains, so that the whole of human history can be reduced down to the only basic truth. The history of all past society is nothing but the history of class antagonism and class struggle. यहाँ पे बोल रहा है कि क्योंकि दुनिया में क्लास स्ट्रगल के अलावा कुछ है ही नहीं, क्लास स्ट्रगल ही ओनली सत्य है, इसके अलावा और कोई सच्चाई तो है नहीं इस दुनिया में. तो इसके अलावा जो भी हिस्ट्री है, जो भी रिलीजन है, जो भी ट्रेडिशन है, उसको पूरा खत्म कर दिया जाए. ठीक है, और पूरे ह्यूमन जो हिस्ट्री है उसको सिर्फ इसी एंगल से देखा जाएगा, क्लास एंगल और क्लास स्ट्रगल के हिसाब से देखा जाएगा. और इसीलिए ये जो रिलीजियन हो गया, मोरालिटी हो गया, इसको इनको इन सारों को ऐसे अबॉलिश किया जाएगा कि इस दुनिया में सिर्फ क्लास एंटागोनिज्म बचेगा, उसके अलावा और कुछ नहीं बचेगा. ठीक है, सो दिस वाज व्हाट
Bijit,
मार्क्स. हाँ
just
हाँ
yeah, Bijit, just one thing. So I just want to actually give the context to the audience because people are joining, like people have joined, a few people have joined. So just to give a context of what we are talking about. So yesterday we had read through the works of son of Jonath Mandal, okay, who wrote a book called untold, the massacres which took place. It's a Bengali book and also English translation. So we went to the English translation. Today, actually, we are. Yesterday, we read the hard facts, the raw truths which was there in the book. Today, we are going to actually decipher why this actually happened. What is the foundation, the bedrock, the ideology of CPM, okay, or the Marxist ideology? Was the ideology responsible for this heinous event which took place? So we are going to take a historical deep dive into Marxism, and then we're going to again scroll down to the 1947 and after environments to actually show that what was happened in 1979 in 31st of January was not a isolated one of a time event. The ideology of the Marxists from Russia to China to Bharat has been to actually eradication of local culture, traditions, religions, and replace the local culture and the traditions by communism as a another religion. Okay, so on that they have actually done a lot of uh, very bad incidents, including in Europe, Poland, South America, in even in Iraq, you had a lot of communist parties, okay, in 1970s and 80s. So we have seen violence as a means to actually win political power and also remain in political power by whatever means possible, including resorting to violence against men, women, children, and unarmed people. Yeah, Bijidda.
Right. So in this context, we are discussing communism first, and so communism as per Communist Manifesto, written by Karl Marx. Um, and so we were discussing abolition of the past, right? Because the past does not really have anything other than class antagonism. So that part will remain because class antagonism is the only eternal truth as per Karl Marx. वही सत्य है, वही सनातन है. तो इसीलिए क्लास एंटेगोनिज्म सिर्फ रखा जाएगा. बाकी जो भी पास्ट का हिस्सा रहा है, जो भी स्टोरी है, मिथ है, कहानी है, रिलीजियन है, मोरालिटी है, ये सब कुछ खत्म कर दिया जाएगा. ठीक है. Then the next abolition will be abolition of nations. So Marx is commenting here that the working men have no country, and one cannot take the proletariats what they have not got, right? So proletariats के पास देने के लिए भी कुछ नहीं है, उनके पास कोई कंट्री भी नहीं है. So furthermore, the national differences between people across the globe are vanishing gradually due to uniformity of the mode of production. क्योंकि कैपिटलिज्म ही और ये जो क्लासिज्म जो मार्क्स देख रहा है यही सत्य है. ठीक है. मोड ऑफ प्रोडक्शन एनीवे इज बेसिकली हेल्पिंग the whole world to sort of wipe off the national boundaries. That's why नेशनल नाम का कोई मतलब नहीं रह जाएगा, right? तो in view of all this, there will be a time when the proletariats will acquire political supremacy and declare itself a nation. मतलब एक ही नेशन बचेगा इवेंचुअली, जो which will be the nation of the proletariats. बाकी जो भी ये जो नेशन इमेजिन किया गया है बेस्ड ऑन कल्चर एंड एवरीथिंग, वो सब खत्म हो जाएगा. ठीक है. So now let me sort of quickly criticize all these points before moving on to put it in the context of India, right? So on a superficial level, obviously it may seem to a naive mind that communism is talking here about creating a very just and equal society where these proletariats will have the power to keep a check on the growth of the bourgeoisie, right? But then we have to dive a little deeper to realize the horrible impact of this class antagonism between different sections of a society, right? And this class antagonism is, by the way, the very basis, the whole hypothesis of communism, right? So notice that communism here talks a very little about creation of wealth. मतलब ये बोल नहीं रहा है कि जो लेबर दिया जा रहा है उसके वजह से वेल्थ क्रिएट हो रहा है. एंड उस हिसाब से देयर शुड बी अ वे जहाँ पे सबको इक्विटेबल sort of access to capital and equitable access to salary, profitability मिल सकता है. Karl Marx is not saying that. Karl Marx is just putting these, imagining two binaries कि proletariat होगा एक तरफ अपना bourgeoisie होगा और उनके आपस में लड़ाई चलेगी. Very attractive idea, but there is no spectrum in it. There is only binary sort of artificial creation of identity. ठीक है. Now, yeah, so obviously the communism is not talking here about creation of wealth. It is talking about a way to capture the wealth created to some ochlocracy, right? कि लोग मेहनत करके चीजें बना रहे हैं. सब लोग मेहनत कर रहे हैं, बुर्जुआजी भी मेहनत कर रहा है, अपना प्रोलेटारिएट क्लास भी मेहनत कर रहा है, एंड देन इट इज लीडिंग टू क्रिएशन ऑफ वेल्थ. But then Marx is saying कि because there is a bigger mob on the side of proletariat, so that mob has the capacity to sort of damage and destroy everything to some petty benefit of no one, right? Now, to achieve this, communism starts to weaponize the identities by creating the binary of oppression and oppressed. You know this, right? This binary is not necessarily realized in the society in terms of wealth, but it can be created out of virtually anything, starting from gender to ethnicity to religion, to name a few. As long as there is a section of the society that is ready to play victimhood and start taking part in the Operation Olympics, the communism continues to have a chance to seep into society and create a vertical split there, right? कि जब तक दुनिया में ये विक्टिम ओलंपिक्स रहेगा, जब तक विक्टिमाइजेशन ऑफ अ सर्टेन क्लास पॉसिबल होगा, तब तक तो मार्क्सिज्म को कोई भी इसमें डाल दो, कोई भी वही टेम्पलेट में डाल दो कि बुर्जुआ या फिर अपना ये हो सक रिलीजन के बेसिस पे हो सकता है, राइट? कि मूमिन काफिर हो गया, एथनिसिटी के बेसिस पे हो सकता है, वाइट ब्लैक हो गया, कास्ट के बेसिस पे हो सकता है कि ब्राह्मण दलित हो गया. सो दिस नेवर एंड्स, राइट? And obviously in a society there are different kind of sort of functioning diversity. What communism does, and any sort of most of the Abrahamic religion does, they sort of make bad use of this diversity. They abuse this diversity to sort of interpret it in terms of hierarchy, right? They look at it from a very myopic, single-eyed perspective, and through that sort of isolationist perspective, they start to judge a society and its different functioning parts, and then say ki one part of the society is apparently higher than the other, and this way they sort of start to create a duel between these factions, right? And this is not to say that no form of societal or historical oppressive forces should never ever be confronted, but doing this the communist way to create social frictions that ignite enmity between two people who are essentially the same and who had been hitherto living peacefully without any ill feeling for each other is antithetical for the cohesive progress of a society, right? मतलब if you are going to talk about operation and समाज में क्या अत्याचार चल रहा है, don't do it at least in the communist way, okay? Do it, try to do it in the assimilative way, and try not to create any sort of binarity and friction between different classes in a society while you start to talk about real political issues, for example, right? And then when communism talks about abolition of individual identity by abolishing the bourgeois class identity, does it really want this to ever happen? Right? I mean, communism is saying कि bourgeois लोग खत्म हो जाएंगे, but communism ये सही में चाहता है क्या? Communism is a political theory that derives its power from the politics of identity, right? Politics of identity is the very soul of communism. अगर कोई सोसाइटी में आइडेंटिटी नहीं रहा तो वहां कम्युनिज्म का कोई काम नहीं रहेगा. Communism will become redundant. So for the sake of its own survival, communism would never want binarity or identity to end in a society, right? तो फॉर एग्जाम्पल अगर बुर्जुआजी अगर खत्म हो जाता है, वहां पे नए बुर्जुआजी हो जाएंगे. कौन होंगे? वो कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी मेंबर्स न्यू बुर्जुआ होंगे, जस्ट लाइक इट इज हैपनिंग इन चाइना, राइट? अगर कोई पुराने अगर कोई रिच अर्बन क्लास अगर उनको खत्म करके या उन्हें चेंज करके कोई बनाया गया, या तो वो रिच क्लास को कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी का हिस्सा बना लिया गया चाइना में, या फिर नया रिच अर्बन सॉर्ट ऑफ क्लास एक पैदा हुआ, हुआ नथिंग बट द मेंबर्स ऑफ द कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी, चाइनीज कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी इटसेल्फ. तो कम्युनिज्म बेसिकली बोलता है कि देयर आर ओके आई मीन इन द सोसाइटी एवरीवन इज इक्वल, बट देयर आर सम पीपल हु आर मोर इक्वल देन द अदर्स, राइट? तो ये जो अलग क्लास क्रिएट करना, एक मतलब बुर्जुआ को हटा के कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी को ऊपर बैठाना, that is the most cunning and deceptive sort of technique that communism has tried to implement across the world. Okay? And then
Yeah,
there is no
Bijita,
eternal truth. Uh-huh.
just one point I want to add here. So, like what we do is like we have seen communism grow from 1900s onwards. Okay, and we had Soviet Union, we had in South America, we also had in Middle East. Okay, we
Right.
have seen communist regimes in a way. Okay, and there hasn't been a place where communists were in power and that place actually prospered. Okay, there might be some exceptions. Okay, but eventually everybody goes the way it is done by the Venezuela. So Venezuela, I think, had the single longest communist regime almost. Okay, and we have seen what has happened to Venezuela. So, in terms of psychology, okay, in terms of human behavior, okay, see, uh, by default, we are a binary thinking organism. Okay, we like good and bad. Okay, so this specific human behavior trait to actually identify something good or bad. So now the communists have actually using this trait to actually create a imagined an imagined oppressor and an imagined oppression, okay, which actually has existed, and that exists because of the way humans we operate. Okay, so there will be some kind of inequality no matter what you do. I have 5 fingers, here is it. Okay, they are not same. Okay, would communists want my fingers to be same? If they are same, my fingers, my hand will not able to function. That is how we have evolved. So it looks very juicy, it looks very unique, it looks very utilitarian. Okay, it's very idea is sugar coated and people like it, but we don't realize it that this sugar coated idea will give you diabetes in the end. Thank you.
Right, right. And I mean, obviously, this sort of, the diversity, it has come from the working of the civilization itself, right? There are various civilizations which has grown in different parts of the world. Maybe some of them got genocided, and some of them have forgotten their old memories. But anyway, we have come from, let's say, some primitive time till now, and there are different people doing different things in the society right now. Obviously, what communism is doing, ki, they want to sort of create the class struggle, and they want to sort of wipe off the sort of tradition and sort of the causal connection of a job, for example, with its ancestors, for example, right, with the evolution of a society. And that's what they want to do, right? That's why communism, what they want to do, they do not admit any value or narrative or truth that a civilization is built upon. So communism does not acknowledge the civilizational identity or continuity. Communism vouches for the complete annihilation and complete abolition of the past and all civilizational values. And then communism achieves it through distortion of historical facts and fraudulent archaeological practices, for example, like just like something happening that, like in this line in India itself, for example. I mean, where the history writers, Archaeological Survey of India, they're heavily communist dominated organizations and institutions, due to which they are distorting historical facts because they want to sort of delete and abolish all the civilizational memories of the society, right? So that कि लोगों को मतलब by distorting the fact they can try to portray it in such a way कि भाई जहां लगे कि अच्छा ये जो दूसरा समाज है इनके ऊपर बहुत जुल्म हुआ है, राइट? जबकि इंडिया में ज्यादा जेनोसाइड इस्लाम से हुआ है, फॉर एग्जांपल, 1000 सालों से। लेकिन वो कम्युनिज्म में नहीं दिखाया जाएगा बिकॉज कम्युनिज्म को एक्चुअली इस्लाम का सहारा चाहिए। मतलब historically communism has made alliance with Islam in order to propagate in this country, And yeah, so now this has organically led to this sort of discussion on communism and Islam, on which I want to again spend 1 minute. So yes, communism and Islam do have a few striking similarities, and we are going to discuss here because it will help us to understand the background of this communist Islamist nexus in Indian subcontinent, and it will help us to understand different massacres such as Bijon Setu massacre or Marichjhapi massacre, right, or Saibadi massacre, to name a few. So just like Islam, communism has a prophet to obey, right, Karl Marx. Like Islam, communism has a book from which all ideas of the world are sought to be derived, Communist Manifesto. Communism has a similar agenda to bring the whole of humanity into its own fold. And like Islam, communism is also a totalitarian ideology that seeks complete control over every individual's life. Both Islam and communism want to achieve complete thought control of the populace. And to do that, both communism and Islam start indoctrination of their followers at a very early age. Both derive their ideas and rights of duty and duties from the sense of quwwat, from the sense of might and power, and nothing else. And thus, communism in the truest sense is Islam without Allah. Okay, that was, I think, the quote by Sitaram Goel. Okay, so because both ideologies have been derived from the very similar degenerate psyche of dividing humanity into believers and unbelievers, they naturally form a nexus to fight their common enemy in all those places where neither communism nor Islam is in power. In such an alliance, Islam gathers the mob and provides the sword to its followers, while communism safeguards them with intellectual cover fire. Islam enhances the population, and communism brings to them food and funding through socialist agenda. Islam creates anarchy on the ground, and communism provides the justification. Islam kills the kafirs, and then communism portrays the violence as class conflict. All this just to grab the power by hook or by crook. But once this Islamo communist nexus ascends to power, they become engaged in fighting each other until one of them is extinct from the captured land. And there are plenty such examples, like in the history of USSR, Iran, China. But a detailed discussion on this point we are going to maybe do in another episode. Okay, now that we know ki communism and Islam, when in a place where they don't exist, they sort of make an alliance to propagate together. We're going to put it in the context of India and try to see ki, how they both played out in the 20th century politics. So maybe you can give you a small comment while I drink a few.
Yeah, yeah. Please,
Yeah.
please, please go ahead. Yeah, actually, I am going to take a few questions which has come. So let me actually answer them for the audience. So first, the latest question: how did the media react to the Marichjhapi massacre at that time? So Didi, so I have shared the link of the book. So there's a site called marichjhapi.com. So there you will find a lot of resource. And this is the English translation of the book that I had read last evening. So if you go through this specific book in English, you will actually also find a lot of political commentary and a lot of media. So there's a media reporter diary. There's a four-part media report diary written by a journalist in the daily called Kalantar. It's a Bengali daily. It's a like far left daily was there. So I think you will find a lot of information which is actually not available. And I read the book precisely for that reason, that book actually documented real time events of political events, of media events, of administrative events, and it quotes exactly where it comes from. So it has been a lot has been erased, but as you know, you cannot erase everything. So you can read that book. Yeah, Bijidda.
Right. So now we are going to discuss Islam, well, communism in the context of India and its assistance uh, with Islam, right? So okay, so you know that this guy Macaulay, he put this minute in non-Indian education, I think in 1835. And from there, it did not take even half a century to sort of, for this lofty, big ambition of this guy, Thomas Macaulay, to be fulfilled, right? Within half a century, a class of Indians emerged in the wake of the 20th century, around 1880s. And these guys were basically Indian in blood and color, but they were English in taste, opinion, morals, and intellect. Now, the language of the rulers were obviously English, and so was the language of the Indian political narrative by and large, right? So even when we have these Congressy babus, they are also talking in like Chost English, and they have very little connection. Many of them have very little connection with the with whatever is going on ground, right? So yeah, so basically this class, this Babu class or the Ashrafi class for the Muslims, they were borrowing their words, thoughts, and narratives from the Western nomenclature. So common Indians were familiar neither with the language nor with the thought process of the English, due to which Congress started to gradually move away from the rank and file. So the Aligarh University created an Ashrafi intelligentsia by 1915 to give the voice to the Ashrafi political dominance of the Indian subcontinent. And then British started to sort of support this Ashrafism, because obviously this was a convenient way to consolidate the native Muslim community so that they can be controlled easily through the British and Ashrafi nexus, and to play them against the Hindu polity. Okay. So basically, British, as we have discussed, right, in previous episodes, the British did this English Ashrafi nexus to rule the native Pasmanda and the Hindu community. So this was again, this was playing out here, and these Congressy Babus, they were so detached from the Indian populace that they cared very little about the floating narratives that could drive the native Hindus and Pasmanda Muslims together towards unified political and spiritual goal. Right. And as you know, ki by I think in 1920s there were I think around 19% Muslims in Congress. By 1925 it became less than 3%. Okay. So obviously, rather than starting a complete rebellion against the British, the Congressy Babus began a propaganda about the need of British institutions in India. And then the common Indians on ground, they could not relate to and reconcile with such a defeatist political ideology of the Congress. So, as a result of all this sort of confusion, the social union stagnated and the political unity was far from a reality. And by 1920s, the Indian society became the epitome of a dystopian society with no clear goal of political or spiritual emancipation, right? So there was a very chaotic crisis in the 1920s in the Indian polity. And amidst this crisis, yeah, basically was born this foreign ideology named communism, right? The Indian communism. And so it was during the time when Congress started to launch a movement in March 1930 against the British. These communists, they drafted a plan of action where the Congress was characterized as a class organization of the capitalists working against the fundamental interests of the toiling masses. So there's this guy Manavendra Roy, M.N. Roy, who was in all probability a stooge of the Russian propaganda machinery, because I think he went to Russia before starting this activism, the communist activism in India. So he's probably a Russian stooge, and I think he was affiliated to this Russian propaganda machinery named Communist International. So he worked tirelessly through his writings to shape up the narrative of the Communist Party in India. And as per this his narrative, point one, India was never a nation before the British conquest. Point two, the Sepoy Revolt in 1857 was socially a reactionary movement. It wanted to uproot the British rule with the revived feudal imperialism of either the Mughals or the Marathas. Point three, the Indian populace is incapable of evolving nationalism or political consciousness. Point four, only Western oriented or denationalized Indians are capable of bringing political methods to bring positive changes in India. Point five, Hindu nationalism is spiritual imperialism spread by a young intellectual of petite bourgeois class, and the young intellectual is named Swami Vivekananda. And point six, Gandhism preaches passivity and repudiates class struggle. Hence, it has become an ideology directed against the mass revolution. Right? So basically, this guy Manavendra Roy is a communist, and he is saying कि भाई गांधी भी बेकार है, विवेकानंद भी बेकार है, तो इस लैंड का ना कोई स्पिरिचुअल इमेंसिपेशन हो सकता है, ना कोई इसमें मास रेवोल्यूशन हो सकता है, और ये लोग जो कांग्रेस है और जो अंग्रेज है वो आपस में जुड़े हुए हैं. Now the point is there were partial truths and partial falsehood, but the way he put everything together to create this central narrative, right? It was amazing. And initially, the communist writings in 1922 lambasted the Congress and the Muslim League equally. But Emin Roy characterized the Muslim League as a close preserve of feudal interests in confrontation of the capitalist class. So यहाँ से ये इनको तितुमीर को जिहादी ना बता के एक चासी का बेटा बताना, किसान का बेटा बनाना, तितुमीर का जो जिहाद था उसको फार्मर मूवमेंट बताना, ये नोशन यहाँ से चालू हुआ कि बेसिकली जो हिंदू जमींदार थे, वो बेसिकली फ्यूडल लॉर्ड थे, उनके अगेंस्ट जो जिहाद हुआ था वो जिहाद नहीं था, वो एक्चुअली क्लास स्ट्रगल था. ये सब नैरेटिव तब आना चालू हुआ. एंड हिंदू मुस्लिम कम्युनल इश्यूज एज अ कॉम्पिटिशन ऑफ जॉब्स बिटवीन द हिंदू एंड द मुस्लिम पेटिट बुर्जुआ. तो ये जो आपस में हिंदू मुस्लिम लड़ रहे हैं, पार्लियामेंट में हो जाए या फिर अंग्रेजों के पास अलग अलग प्रस्ताव लेके जा रहे हैं, इट इज नथिंग बट कॉम्पिटिशन ऑफ जॉब्स बिटवीन हिंदूज एंड मुस्लिम्स. But the sheer Muslim mob power led by the Ashrafs that inflicted violence during the Khilafat agitation in the 1920s slowly started to capture the imagination of the communists. So, after the Khilafat movement and after seeing the power of violence by the Islamist mob, the communists started to gradually change their narrative. तो मतलब खिलाफत के बाद कम्युनिस्ट वाले ये बोलने लगे कि हमारा जो रिवोल्यूशन है वो बेसिकली इस्लाम के खिलाफ नहीं है, ना ही कि वो इस्लामिस्ट के खिलाफ है. ये एक्चुअली जो इंडिया का प्रिमिटिव हिंदू पास्ट है उसके खिलाफ हमारा कम्युनिस्ट स्ट्रगल है. एंड जो कम्युनिस्ट स्ट्रगल है दैट इज अगेंस्ट द ऑपरेशन ऑफ द हिंदू लैंडलॉर्ड्स एंड कैपिटलिस्ट्स ऑन द पुअर मुस्लिम पीजेंट्स एंड प्रोलेटारिएट मुस्लिम्स. कि बिकॉज इंडिया का एक हिंदू पास्ट रहा है और ये जो जमींदार है ये फ्यूडल लॉर्ड्स है, तो हमारा जो लड़ाई है इनके खिलाफ है. और हमारे लड़ाई में कौन शामिल होगा? जो पुअर जो मुस्लिम किसान हैं और जो प्रोलेटारिएट मुस्लिम्स हैं, उनको आगे आना पड़ेगा ये प्रिमिटिव हिंदू पास्ट को एबोलिश करने के लिए. Now, the Communist Party, in order to prove their allegiance to the Ashrafs of Aligarh, came up with a new thesis around the same time. They started to portray the arrival of Islam in India as an equalizing force and as an embodiment of fair play that established in India social equality and human brotherhood. कि इससे पहले तो इंडिया में बहुत कास्टिज्म ही था, जब इस्लाम आया तब इक्वलिटी आया सही मायने में, और जब इस्लाम आया तब ह्यूमन ब्रदरहुड आया. ये नहीं बोलेंगे कि जो मुस्लिम ब्रदरहुड है दैट इज एक्चुअली एक्सक्लूसिव सेंस ऑफ ब्रदरहुड, राइट? वो दुनिया को काफिर मुमिन में बांटता है, ये नहीं बोलना था. इन्हें बोलना था कि ये जो इस्लाम आया ये प्रोग्रेसिव था और ये ब्रदरहुड में, यूनिवर्सल ब्रदरहुड में यकीन रखता था. The Manavendra Roy wrote in a book titled The Historical Role of Islam, published in 1939. And there he claimed that the Islam had attempted to complete the social revolution in India that was started earlier by Buddhism, Islam, and in its very doctrine, they hate Buddhism as much as it hate the human brotherhood. Neither did it act as a progressive force when it invaded and destroyed cities after cities, burned libraries and universities, raped and killed and enslaved millions of Hindus over the last thousand of years. But communist writing did not care to talk about all these brutal assaults and these civilizational wounds, right, of the Hindus. Communists did not care to comment on such atrocities because the communists did not have much nuisance. The Hindus did not have much nuisance values that could be effectively utilized by these communists, right? To wage revolution in India. So Hindus thus were less useful bots than rabid Islamists. तो ये चलता रहता है. और फिर in 1942-43 में communist went one notch further and then they proposed through Gangadhar Adhikari thesis कि India is comprised of not one, not two, but 18 different nations. And then communists started to propose that India is not a single nation and India should basically be dismantled to give birth to 18 other nations other than Pakistan and मतलब East and West Pakistan. ठीक है. So the Communist Party of India and its cadre, through the wanton fabrication of false narrative, equipped the factionist powers like Muslim League to fight for a separate land called Pakistan, and it provided the jihadi forces a mask to cover the countless massacres and genocide of Hindus. मतलब कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी जो नैरेटिव इंडिया में दिया उसका एक्चुअली रिजल्ट ये रहा कि ये बोलने लगे कि जो इंडिया में हुआ है वो एक्चुअली तो क्लास स्ट्रगल है. अगर गजनवी का महमूद अगर इंडिया में आया और ये जो जिहाद किया, सोमनाथ लूटा, या जो भी इतने हिंदुओं का कत्लेआम किया, ये तो एक्चुअली वाज अ क्लास स्ट्रगल. क्योंकि वो लोग गरीब थे, मुसलमान गरीब थे, यहाँ पे बहुत पैसा वैसा रखा हुआ था. तो इन्होंने बेसिकली ये रॉबिन हुड था जो सोमनाथ मंदिर से खजाना लेके आम आदमी में बांट दिया. ठीक है, टू एस्टैब्लिश द ह्यूमन ब्रदरहुड. तो ये डैमेज, ये जो यूनिक नैरेटिव टू जस्टिफाई द इस्लामिस्ट वायलेंस इन इंडिया, ये कम्युनिज्म का चॉइसेस्ट गिफ्ट है to all the Hindus and obviously to the whole of India and the Indian subcontinent by large. तो ये जो हुआ इसके वजह से because communism even today want to break India into 18 different fragments, you have to understand that the Communist Party of India, they have not disowned Gangadhar Adhikari hypothesis, which means कि Communist Party of India जो अभी भी इलेक्शन लड़ रहा है, they still want to divide India into 18 different fragments. They have never apologized or disowned Gangadhar Adhikari thesis. You have to keep this in mind. These are the dangerous forces that are even fighting Indian elections even now. Anyway, so
Vijita, just
uh-huh.
one adjacent comment here. So as you mentioned,
Sure.
correct, in the books written by communists, okay, they whitewashed the atrocities done by the Islamic invaders and portrayed them as Robin Hoods. Okay, let's look at it. On the other hand, few incidents of sati which took place, okay, for justifiable reasons because they didn't want to be violated by the Muslim invaders. They had to give their lives up so that they don't get violated. That was taken as a kind of a oppressive behavior by the Hindus and created a kind of a atrocity literature, which went on
Right.
writing books, publishing. So you have to see the two faces of this movement. At one, they are whitewashing
Right.
and creating a positive narrative that the invaders who came here looted and did a lot of atrocities, killed millions of people over a 1,000 year period. They are considered,
Right.
they are portrayed as Robin Hoods. On the other hand, those people who were actually fighting with their lives, even men, women, children gave their lives not to be inflicted by their swords. They became the victims became the oppressor. So, on this context, you need to
Right.
understand the Marichjhapi case. The Marichjhapi incident, the massacre happened where the refugees were promised by government of West Bengal that they would be brought back to Sundarbans in specific regions and they will be resettled there. It was their promise which they thought, okay, they are not lying. But when they win the elections in
Right.
1977, they go back to their promise which they given to these refugees to win election votes, and they say we can't do this. So in this context, you need to understand that because they are Nomoshidro SC ST Hindus, they did not matter to them. They were oppressors in so many ways. Yeah. Thank you.
Exactly. Exactly. And yeah, so let's now start to discuss this part. So you see, now, so what is the historical role of communism in India? To basically to assist the Ashrafi forces to invade to and reconquer the land and destroy the very identity of India, that is civilizational in origin and Hindu in essence. ये जो इंडिया का जो हिंदुत्व है इंडिया के अंदर, जो हिंदू एसेंस है इंडिया का, वो खत्म करना, ये कम्युनिज्म का बेसिकली रोल रहा है. तो कम्युनिज्म हैज प्रोवाइडेड द नैरेटिव to the staffs to sort of justify and to influence them in committing crimes and massacres and genocides even in modern India. ठीक है, तो इसी चक्कर में communism in India has historically adopted Hindu hatred, Hindu messiah in their doctrine, and it has led to innumerable Hindu massacres, right? And in my book, History of Hindu Messiah and Hindu Genocides, I have discussed a large number of such genocides. It started with the Chitpavan Brahman massacre. So, जब 30th Jan और 31st Jan, I don't know, जब मोहनदास गांधी को गोली मारा गया, उसके बाद एक मैसेकर किया कांग्रेस वालों ने और कम्युनिस्ट वालों ने किया, जहाँ पे जो सावरकर के जो भाई थे, गोपाल, क्या नाम था उनका, आई फॉरगॉट, जो सावरकर जी के जो भाई थे, अपना विनायक दामोदर सावरकर के जो भाई थे, उनको वुंडेड किया गया और उसके वजह से उनका कुछ दिनों में हॉस्पिटल में मौत हो गया, है ना. तो वो एक हो गया जो महाराष्ट्र में हुआ था चित्पावन ब्राह्मण के ऊपर. क्यों? क्योंकि जो नाथुराम गॉडसे थे वो अपेरेंटली चित्पावन ब्राह्मण थे, तो इसलिए चित्पावन ब्राह्मणों का मैसेकर कर दिया गया. ठीक है. मतलब गांधी जो अहिंसा ये सब बोलते थे, कांग्रेस जो मास्किंग पहना के रखे थे अपने ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का, गांधी का जो अहिंसा वाला मास्क पहना के रखा था, वो दिख गया गांधी जी, मतलब मोहनदास गांधी मरने के बाद. फिर कम्युनिस्ट वालों ने एक मैसेकर किया 1970 को, 17 मार्च, साइबरडी मैसेकर, जो हम लोग बाद में डिस्कस करेंगे जब 17 मार्च आएगा. और फिर ये आई थिंक बर्धमान में हुआ था. बर्धमान बंगाल का एक डिस्ट्रिक्ट है. वहाँ पे बहुत ही बुरी तरीके से एक फैमिली को पूरा हत्या कर दिया गया. और उसका अभी तक कोई भी कॉन्विक्टेड नहीं हुआ, इवन आफ्टर आई डोंट नो हाउ मेनी इयर्स. फिर आता है अपना इम्पोर्टेंट और एक मैसेकर आता है, जो ये मरीचझापी मैसेकर है. ठीक है, तो मरीचझापी मैसेकर का कॉन्टेक्स्ट आपको समझाने के लिए वी हैव टू स्टार्ट विद जोगेन मंडल अगेन, राइट. सो जोगेन मंडल वाज दिस गाय who thought ki because the economic I mean because the Dalits in Hindus and the Muslims in India, they are economically backward, so there exists a common economic interest between the Hindu Dalits and the Muslims, which which people like, I mean, lower so-called lower caste people like Jogen Mandal can sort of exploit in order to win elections, right? तो जोगेन मंडल इसने क्या किया, इन्होंने इन्होंने एक तपसीली पार्टी बनाए थे, जो 1946 का जो इलेक्शन था, which was a very vital election to decide whether Pakistan will be born or not, जोगेन मंडल ने अपना तफसीली पार्टी का सपोर्ट मुस्लिम लीग को दे दिया. एंड एज ए रिजल्ट ये जो बंगाल साइड है, यहाँ वो मुस्लिम लीग ने इलेक्शन स्वीप कर दिया. ठीक है. एंड देन ऑब्वियसली क्रिएशन ऑफ पाकिस्तान बिकम अ रियलिटी आफ्टर 1946. बट एनीवे, जब पाकिस्तान क्रिएट हो गया, फिर 1947 में यही जो लोअर कास्ट हिंदूज हैं, स्पेसिफिकली कम्युनिटीज लाइक द नोमोशूद्र कम्युनिटीज, इनके ऊपर फिर हमला होने लगा, मैसेकर होने लगा, इनका लार्ज स्केल जेनोसाइड होने लगा. तो फिर जोगेन मंडल ने उनका थोड़ा बहुत आंख खुला. He by then he became the Minister of Law in Pakistan, I guess, and also at some point he was in the Ministry of Kashmir Affairs. तो वहां से उन्होंने रिजाइन करके एक लंबा चौड़ा रेजिग्नेशन लेटर देके वो वापस इंडिया आ गए. बट एनीवे, तो द जोगेन मंडल्स दलित मुस्लिम यूनिटी इन इंडिपेंडेंट पाकिस्तान, it went down the drain when the Islamist state of Pakistan started to slay the poor Hindus from marginalized communities such as Namoshudra communities as part of jihad. Pestered by the systemic persecution, these Hindu Bengalis initially migrated to Dandakaranya, a vast arid land that stretched across Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, modern day Chhattisgarh, and Maharashtra. And when the Communist Front came to power in West Bengal in the 1970s, these Hindu Bengalis started to move into a large number of islands in the Sundarban. ठीक है, तो ये ज्योति बसु जाके बोले थे कि इफ वी विन द इलेक्शन वी विल ब्रिंग यू बैक, और ये सच में इलेक्शन जीत गए. तो तब नवशूद्र जो कम्युनिटी थे वो अपना दंडकार जो अपना इंडिया का मध्य प्रदेश एरिया में है वहां से ये लोग सुंदरबन माइग्रेट करने लगे इन लार्ज नंबर्स. ठीक है, सुंदरबन माइग्रेट करने लगे. एंड इन अर्ली 1978 a few hundred refugees initially settled down on the Marichjhapi island. The influx of refugees saw a sharp increase thereafter, and by July 1978 around 30,000 to 40,000 Hindu refugees had settled down in Marichjhapi. ठीक है, 30-40 हजार आ गए. They started to make their own carpentry workshop, BD making unit. From Kendu lives in Sundarban. They started to build bakeries. They started this hosiery unit. They started a cooperative for farming and fishing. They started a secondary school. And within a few months of moving in, the refugees of these Marichjhapi, they become self-reliant. ठीक है, इनके पास सब कुछ था, मतलब स्कूल थे, इंडस्ट्रीज थे, फार्मिंग कर रहे थे, जस्ट लाइक हिंदू कम्युनिटी, राइट, हार्ड वर्किंग पीपल. बट ये एक्चुअली the self reliance, this very self reliance by these नवशूद्र कम्युनिटी, ये कम्युनिस्ट लोगों के लिए चोखेर वाली हो गया, राइट. दे बिकेम द टारगेट बिकॉज ऑफ दिस वेरी सेल्फ रिलायंस. क्यों? क्योंकि कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी सोच रहे थे कि इनको ये बना के इन रिफ्यूजी को यहाँ लाएंगे, इनको जो भी खाना पानी थोड़ा बहुत इनका बंदोबस्त करते रहेंगे, और इन एक्सचेंज ऑफ दैट वी विल गेट द वोट्स ऑफ दिस पीपल, राइट. कि इनको डिपेंडेंट भी रखेंगे, उसके वजह से हमें वोट मिलता रहेगा. ठीक है, सम स्टेट इन वेस्टर्न ओडिशा, राइट राइट, ओडिशा में था, मॉडर्न डे छत्तीसगढ़ में है, तो वहां तो रह गए, काफी लोग रह गए, जो आए उनके साथ ये हुआ था. यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड, यहाँ पे दे केम इन अ फ्यू टेंस ऑफ थाउजेंड्स, बट बांग्लादेश से जब माइग्रेट किए थे वहां लाखों में आए थे, ज्यादातर तो मूव नहीं किए थे. Anyway, so the self-reliance was not something that the communists wanted the refugees to have. It hampered the prospect of using these people as servile and loyal vote bank. Hence, the communist state government declared that all those who had returned from Dandakaranya and other parts of India who had resettled in Bengal would have to leave the state. They used the state police and the local communist cadres to threaten and beat up the Hindu refugees, herd them to train stations, and bundle them into trains leaving to other states. Tens of thousands of Hindu refugees were driven away from Bengal this way, but the Hindus of Marichjhapi, they refused to bend. From end of December 1978, Communist Party started to spread wild rumors about the vile motives of the settlers, such as A. The settlers were Hindu hardliners, and their ambition was to establish Hindu dominance in Sundarban. B. The settlers were being funded by foreign forces and were plotting rebellion against India. ये सब rumor फैला रहे थे. Following this, the communist cadres started to land on the island stealthily and damage boats, bullock carts, cowsheds of the islanders. When even this harassment failed, the cops and the cadres, they started economic blockade of the island. After more than a week of blockade, there was shortage of water, medicine and food. तो पहले तो इनको पीटने लगे, तो पीटने फिर वही जो हमारा गोधन है वो सब बर्बाद करने लगे. बोट वहां तोड़ने लगे, ठीक है, काउशेड्स पे हमला करने लगे, काव पे हमला करने लगे। तो ये सब में भी जब हैरेसमेंट के बाद नहीं दबा मोरिच झापी के जो नवशूद्र कम्युनिटी है, फिर ये लोग इकोनॉमिक पूरा ब्लॉकेट चालू कर दिया। 1 वीक तक इन्होंने ब्लॉकेट चालू रखा, और कोई भी पानी हो, मेडिसिन हो, खाना हो, ये सब घुसने नहीं दिया। और इस ब्लॉकेट की वजह से मोरिच झापी के जो हिंदूज थे, वो उन्होंने फिर घास खाना चालू कर दिया। दे स्टार्टेड टू ईट ग्रास, ठीक है। और उसके वजह से जो बच्चे थे उनका गैस्ट्रो इंटेस्टिनल डिजीजेस होने लगे, जिनसे काफी बच्चे मरने भी लगे, ठीक है। और फिर क्या हुआ, फिर 29 ऑफ जैन 1979, तो अभी तक नहीं दबे, बच्चे मर रहे हैं, फिर भी वो कम्युनिटी अभी तक जूझ रहा है ना। But on 29th of Jan 1979, out of desperation, around 20 people of Marichjhapi sailed to the nearby Kumirmari. तो कुमिरमारी और मरीचझापी आसपास है, आई थिंक 10-20 मिनट बाय बोट ये टाइम लेता है ना। So they started to go to Kumirmari to get food and other supplies. But they were caught by the cops and communist cadres at the Kumirmari bazaar. A fight broke out and the cops started to shoot the Hindus of Marichjhapi. वहां पे मरीचझापी की जो हिंदू थे उनको शूट करने लगे। इसमें ये कैडर भी था और ये अपना कॉप्स भी था। After a dozen Hindus got killed, who were later thrown into the crocodile-infested कोरन खाली river by the cops. गोली मार के मार दिया, फिर बगल वाले जो झील है, जो खाड़ी है, वहां पे फेंक दिया। When the news reached Moricjhapi on कब आया था, 30th of June afternoon, I think जो next day था, there was a huge outrage. तो ये सुन के 30th of January क्या हुआ, 16 women, a group of 16 women, they started to sail towards Kumirmari the next morning. And the assumption was that the cops would not touch women breaking the blockade. They had little idea about how much humanity and empathy cops have इन अ कम्युनिस्ट रेजिम। तो ये सोच रहे थे कि खाना तो इन्हीं में लाना है, तो लड़कियों को भेजते हैं, लड़कियों पे तो हाथ नहीं उठाएगा ये जो कम्युनिस्ट कॉप्स हो जाए या फिर कम्युनिस्ट कैडर हो जाए। उनको कोई आइडिया नहीं था कि कम्युनिस्ट रेजिम कितना ब्रूटल होता है। देयर बोट्स वर रैम्ड, द वुमेन जंप्ड इनटू द वाटर एंड ट्राइड टू swim away. The police started shooting into water and killed at least 2 women. तो ये देख के ये लड़कियों पे हमला कर दिया। अब लड़की जब वहां से उतर के खाड़ी में उतर गए और स्विम करने लगे, तो उनपे गोली चला दिया पुलिस ने। और फिर इसमें एटलीस्ट मतलब 2 women got killed. The Hindus of Marichjhapi saw the killings of these women and then they started to roar in protest with lathis, choppers, sickles and whatever arms they could lay their hands on. तो ये देख के तो ऑब्वियसली जो मॉब था वो भड़क गया। एंड दिस वाज, ये जो कम्युनिस्ट रेजिम है ये यही चाहते थे, ठीक है, इनको इसी तरह पोर्ट्रे करना कि ये लोग हार्डलाइनर एक्सट्रीमिस्ट हिंदू है। So this was the moment the cops and the cadets were waiting for. They landed in Marichjhapi, fired at the protesters, raped and killed them, and looted their properties. They did not spare even little children who took shelter in local school. The next day was 1st of Feb, and Saraswati Puja was to be celebrated in the school, but the state was merciless to the Hindu children. 50 children aged between 5 and 12 were taken out of the school and they were decapitated. 15 बच्चों का गला काट दिया गया. The idol of goddess Saraswati was smashed into smithereens. Around 1700, so officially 1700 Hindus, including many women and children, were thus massacred on Marichjhapi on 31st Jan 1979. तो ऑफिशियली नंबर है 1700 इंक्लूडिंग वुमेन चिल्ड्रन, बट अनऑफिशियली बोला जाता है 10,000 हिंदुओं का मैसाकर कम्युनिस्ट वालों ने तब किया था। The rest of the Hindus had to flee to other places. मोरिचापी खाली कर दिया गया। तो ये मोरिचापी का स्टोरी है। और फिर उससे पहले हमने थोड़ा उसका बैकग्राउंड भी डिस्कस कर लिया। उसके बाद भी काफी मैसाकर कम्युनिस्ट वालों ने किया, जैसे बिजोन सेतु मैसाकर है, जहाँ पे आनंद मार्गी जो सन्यासी है, मॉन्क्स एंड नन्स बोथ, उनको आग लगा के जला के मार दिया गया, ठीक है। फिर अपना राम जन्मभूमि कौर सेवक मैसाकर, बेसिकली ये समाजवादी पार्टी ने किया था। समाजवाद मतलब अगेन दे आर लेफ्ट ओरिएंटेड कजिन्स ऑफ द कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी। फिर उसके बाद अभी फिर छोटो अंगाड़िया हुआ अपना, बंगाल में मेदिनीपुर में हुआ था। छोटो अंगाड़िया के बाद हुआ था अपना रिसेंटली एक मैसेकर हुआ जो मैं लिखा हूँ, जो पोस्ट पोल मैसेकर हुआ 2021 टीएमसी, दैट इज आल्सो अ लेफ्ट विंग पार्टी ऑफ इंडिया। फिर एक खामोंग शेख मैसेकर हुआ जो म्यांमार में हुआ था। ठीक है, तो ये सब तो इंडियन सब कॉन्टिनेंट में मतलब चलता रहा है बाय द कम्युनिस्ट्स एंड बाय द जिहादिस्ट।
Yes, so thank you, Bijit. I think we needed this historical context because we read the effect, what happened, but why it happened, and what was the ideology or the political ideology or the social ideology behind this. That is something that we needed this to actually understand the context of it, the whole context, the holistic way to understand this. So it was great actually to actually you can come and share your time and give us this information that people would understand where it comes from. Okay, communists have done a lot of bad things, but it's important for people to understand why they do what they do and how they do. That's important. So now we will take a few questions
Right.
from the audience. We have a few questions. So the first question that we have is retrowave. How do communists aim to destroy Hindu identity while seemingly aligning with Abrahamic ideologies instead of challenging them? Isn't that hypocritical of Marx's own ideas?
Isn't it hypocritical? Would you call it a I mean, okay. So no matter whether communism is aligning with Islamism or Abrahamism, it does not matter. Marxism is hypocritical, right? मार्क्सिज्म क्लेम कुछ और करता है और आखिर में इंटेंट कुछ और रखता है. So because it puts on a mask of this whatever it social and global equality and everything, and instead it delivers a bunch of new bourgeois who are basically the Communist Party members and no one else. It is hypocritical, no matter whether it allies with the jihadist or not. And in terms of, well, not in terms of Marx's own ideas, but by its very philosophy. uh, Now, how communists aim to destroy the Hindu identity? So now you have to understand, इसके पीछे ये एक हिस्ट्री तो था कि जो इंडिया में हुआ है, कि इंडिया में दिखाया गया है कि इंडिया हैड अ वेरी प्रिमिटिव हिंदू पास्ट, and only after Islam came, India became a little equal, and the brotherhood, the sense of brotherhood got generated among the people. ये बेसिकली इंडियन कम्युनिस्ट ने दिखाया, बट देन यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड कि ये एक्चुअली आया कहाँ से है. Because एम एन रॉय वॉज अ रशियन स्टूज, he could not go against the party line of the Russian, right? They could not go against the Russian Communist Party. So we have to know what Marx himself used to think about the Indian society, right? तो मार्क्स जब उसका एनालिसिस लेके कि बुर्जुआ है, प्रोलेटारियत है, क्लास स्ट्रगल है, ये लेके जब इंडियन विलेजेस को देखा या फिर इंडियन सोसाइटीज को देखा, तब उसे इतना ये मतलब ये डायरेक्टली ये वाला जो बाइनरी ये दिखाई नहीं दिया, क्योंकि जो इंडियन विलेजेस थे वो अपने आप में सेल्फ रिलायंट थे. They used to grow crops, weave their own clothes. They used to have their own sort of metallurgy and other sort of things that मतलब कुमार भी थे, लोहार भी थे, स्वर्णकार भी थे, देवता भी था, है ना. तो सब सब लोग ही थे. बट तो मार्क्स ने एक नया आइडिया दिया. मार्क्स ने बोला कि सी, लुक एट इंडियन सोसाइटी, because this is not an urban society, because this society has not reached a certain level of urbanization, that's why this society is very static. ठीक है. और ये जो इंडियन सोसाइटी का जो स्टैटिकनेस का जो आइडिया है, वो एम एन रॉय ने उठा लिया. ठीक है. तो ऑब्वियसली ये एक्चुअली मार्क्स के लाइन पे ही था. तो मार्क्स के ओन आइडिया के हिसाब से it was in line with the Marx's own ideas. But now, why did it start to align with the Abrahamic ideologies? Why? Because first of all, the Abrahamic ideologies were in power, and secondly, जो देसी मुस्लिम थे, the देसी अब्राहमिक्स, they had a better nuisance value, right? So जो की जरूरत होता है, because at that time the Indian Marxist parties are trying to like they are having this wet dream of waging a rebellion in India. Now हिंदुओं को तो ऐसे चीजों में ला नहीं सकते, तो उनके पास पड़े थे जो मुस्लिम जो पासमानदा क्लास था, तो उन्हें बहकाने के लिए ये नया टाइप ऑफ नैरेटिव काढ़ा गया, राइट?
Yeah, thank you. We'll take one more question. Let me just check. Yeah. So, what were USSR's views about Islam before disintegration? Now, I think Didi wants to understand the relationship between the Muslims and the communists in the USSR, former USSR republic, politically
राइट
and
राइट
socially.
नो सो मार्क्स का आइडिया ये था कि इस्लाम is actually a very, it has a feudal structure, and because it has a feudal structure, यहाँ पे भी मतलब there is a large section of people जिनको दबाया रखा जाता है. यूएसएसआर व्यू ऑफ इस्लाम इज, सी यूएसएसआर मतलब जो रशिया जिसे बोलते हैं वो बेसिकली वहाँ ग्रीक ऑर्थोडॉक्स क्रिश्चियनिटी चलता है, right? Which is a relatively conservative form of Christianity, and because of that, तो ग्रीक ऑर्थोडॉक्स चर्च के ऊपर भी कम्युनिस्ट वालों ने हमला किया है. But in general, Communist Party of Russia, they used to have very sort of bad impression about Islam, more than what they had for the Greek Orthodox Church. तो इसीलिए तो मतलब ये जो सारे इतने सारे किर्गिस्तान हो गया, यहाँ तुर्कमेनिस्तान हो गया, ये जो टूटा इसी वजह से टूटा कि एक्चुअली the social contract between Islam and the communism was not very solid at the foundational level, at least in the context of USSR.
Yes. So we'll take the last question from, sorry, not this one. This one. Yeah. Retrowave asks, we are really binary thinking beings as humans, or it is our Abrahamic ideological subversion that has led to this sort of thinking. Okay, let me elaborate. So he's thinking that, okay, when I mentioned that humans, we as humans, we look at black and white. Can you do it or you can't do it? Okay, we don't go into the gray areas. Okay, that's a general basic human behavior, general behavior. So is it that the Marxists or the Abrahamics utilized this general behavior to actually weaponize it, and or the Marxists did it, or it is something that was invented by the Marxists or Abrahamics themselves? So that is his question.
Right. So let's talk about binarity first, right?
Hmm.
Whether binarity is essential or is it an intrinsic, not value, but it is an intrinsic sort of perception of a human mind. Is it intrinsic conception of a human mind, right? Yes, it is, right? So, I mean, in fact, I'm sort of trying to understand this very phenomena, and I'm writing my next book on it in order to sort of put it in a into a single framework. But in my opinion, what is going on? So, so there is one thing called bhavlok, right? And then there is thing called bhutlok. So bhavlok is, you can think of it as sort of your spiritual part, right? And then bhutlok is your mind and the physical world. Now in the bhutlok, you have, obviously you have binarity. Why? Because in bhutlok you have space, and you conceive space and you conceive time, and you have a causal structure of every event, कि कोई भी event अगर हो रहा है उसका कोई cause हुआ है. So if you have event 1, event 2, event 3, and so on, they are connected through a causal chain, right? So you have a cause and an effect connected by an arrow, and these are actually dual, right? They live in a dual space where some cause is creating some effect, or a bunch of causes creating some effect, right? So this duality is there obviously in the Bhutlok. and it is there in the sense human perceive it as a dual form, right? Because there is an arrow of time dictated by obviously maybe thermodynamics ki, the arrow of time is dictated by the increasing amount of entropy of the universe. तो उस तरफ अगर time जा रहा है and we are because we are perceiving time, we are perceiving a duality between the chain of events. So obviously there is a duality. Now the question is, space and time itself are relative ideas, right? So maybe it is very difficult to imagine something with space and time, but I can tell you something where time does not exist. For example, if everything stops, then there is no time, right? Because time is dual to movement itself. If there is no movement, there is no time. Similarly, space is basically dual to extent, right? If there is everything uniform in this universe, then there is no space. Space is a redundant idea, and then it is an unuseful or non-existent idea, as per at least as per physics. So space-time itself, they are relative idea, and because of that maybe this whole chain of events or the causality, the loop of the chain of causality, they exist in space time and nowhere else. Maybe this duality that we perceive as cause and effect duality, maybe they don't exist. They are just our perception of reality, right? So that's why I see this binarity of events and binarity of thoughts and minds and everything. Now, in the Abrahamic ideological subversion, so in Abrahamic ideology, there exists binarity. Obviously, there is this mumin, kafir, believer, unbeliever, what pagan, heathen, and believer duality. And those dualities emerged out of some politics, right? Initially, pagan man. They were not involved in this kind of dualism. To like really, a pagan man used to believe ki maybe there is a god, there are more gods, we don't know. So there he started to derive spirituality bottom up, right? For example, he looked around and he looked up in the sky. He started to see the cosmic sort of movement of planets and the satellites, for example. From there, he made calendars. From there, he made different astronomical discoveries that Earth is round and Earth is sort of having a precision with a period of 24,000 years or so. So, when he was discovering all that, he also conceptualized God from natural events and through the abstraction of natural events. Like Saraswati is the goddess of knowledge, right? Saraswati Das is a abstract concept, unlike Indra, who is the god of, let's say, Vajra, right? तो बेसिकली ये जो था, ये अब्राहमिक मतलब पेगन मैन के दिमाग में ये नहीं था कि इसमें बिलीव करोगे तो तुम पहुंच जाएगे. उसे पता था कि अ म्यूजिशियन कैन कॉन्सीव गॉड इन अ फंडामेंटली डिफरेंट वे देन अ बिजनेसमैन, एंड अ पेगन मैन वाज ओके विद इट. ठीक है, उसे पता था कि लोगों का मेंटल जोन अलग है, उसके हिसाब से वो भगवान को परसीव करता है. बट व्हाट हैपेंड इन अब्राहमिक आइडियोलॉजी is that they started to politicize God, right? Because they wanted to do large scale sort of quick fixing of things, maybe. That's how, and that's why they started. Like Moses jab aaya, Moses said to his followers ki bhai, Israel is a gifted land, right? Because you are chosen people by the God, so you deserve to go back to that land. यहाँ पे गॉड और पॉलिटिक्स एक हो गया, गॉड और लैंड एक हो गया. तो यहाँ पे जो अब्राहमिक आइडियोलॉजी चालू हुआ कि टू कन्विंस अ लार्ज सेक्शन ऑफ पीपल, मे बी रिलीजियन वाज द मोस्ट कन्विंसिंग sort of ideology to embrace, and thus these prophets or whatever, these guys, they started to use religion. तो वहां पे obviously binary आया जो अभी तक चलता जा रहा है. So this was my long answer to this short question.
Yes. So I think, yeah, I will add one aspect of it. So actually, he was like in the last portion of the question, he asked whether the binary is inherent or it is created by the Abrahamic. So your answer is, in very plain language, is that the binary exists because it is part of our perceptual universe. Okay, the way we perceive the whole creation, sansar. Okay, That is where the binary is created, the duality is created. So duality exists, good and bad exists in our minds, in our perception, because of the nature of who we are, okay, the human we are. So it is not invented by the Abrahamics. Yes, Abrahamics have actually weaponized it, including the communists, to actually to uh, to achieve their own political and social goals, okay, which are not in any
Right.
means good for overall health of humanity or for society or for civilization.
Right, right.
So
I agree with.
yeah, yeah. So thank you, Bijitda, for your time.
Thanks.
Okay. So thank you for your time and thanks for coming again. So we will again connect with you to discuss few more other topics. So till then,
Sure.
thank you. Jai Shri Ram. Vande
Jai
Mataram.
Shri Ram. Vande Mataram. Good night.
Good night.